children of Israel are the children of the Negroes. All right. Uh, we're going to get into this lesson, and I hope it's very informative and something I'm very excited about getting into. Um, the children of Israel are the children of the Negroes, more specifically, the people who came across the seas of the transatlantic slave trade and were scattered all over the world are the children of Israel. All right. What percentage of African Americans come from West Africa? All right, that's the question typed in. All right. African Americans' Y-DNA is overwhelmingly West African in origin at a rate of 73 to 82%. The main paternal haplogroup of West Africa is E1B1A. Most African Americans would test to maintain 60% of the Semitic gene compared to the limber 73%. In other words, even though we left Africa in the transatlantic slave trade, and the people that stayed there, the limber, who tested to be 73% Jewish, 73% still having the gene pool of the ancient Israel, of Israel itself. We still maintain, even with the mixing with slave master, and everybody else, we still maintain 60% of the ancient Israel genes, right? And majority of us come from the same area. Yeah, that makes sense because the slave trade picked us up from the same area, Negroland, or surrounding areas in West Africa. We're going to see that. As a matter of fact, let me put the map up. As you can see, the areas, the colored areas, that's the majority area where the African Americans were picked up from. Right? That's the areas. Most historians agree that the Israelites fled persecution into where? West Africa. So where did the Israelites flee to? West Africa. Where was the transatlantic slave trade mostly centered? Where did they pick up the people? West Africa. Right? So, question. Where did Native Africans get the people, the Native Africans, get the people for the transatlantic slave trade? Now, I keep saying Native Africans, and then I said this word, Hebrew people, or the ancient Hebrews, or the Negroes. The Negroes. Now, remember, you came up and you were fleeing persecution from your homeland, right? From Israel, from Judah, from Jordan, all that region. You came down through Africa and you traveled down to West Africa till you arrived thereabouts. Most of you, not all of you, but most of you scattered all through Africa, but most of you arrived in West Africa. Then the Native Africans, when the white people came, or the Europeans came, and they wanted to make deals with the kings and give them this and give them that, and they say, well, give us people. Well, they didn't take from their own tribe. They took from the people who had migrated there down to West Africa, who were not originally there. They took the Hebrew people. They took the Negroes. Okay? They took them. Right? Yeah. See, when a Comanche Indian sees an Indian, and he's a Comanche and they're an Apache, a Comanche knows that the Apache is not a Comanche. An Apache knows a Comanche is not an Apache. All right? A Huron knows that an Apache is not a Huron. Indian. But when the white people see them, or when Europeans see them, at first inspection, all they see is two Indians. Two Indians. Now, when they came and they, had people, black people, in their opinion, and they taught us this, blacks turned on blacks, and blacks sold their own selves into slavery. No, they sold other tribes, other clans. White people made the distinction between white and black. Everybody, pretty much in Africa, was black, but what you had was different clans. So they recognized that you were of a different clan. They didn't sell their own clan into slavery. Then they went up there, captured some people of another clan, and then put them on the boats. And the people that they were capturing were basically foreigners who had migrated down into the west parts of Africa because they were Israel. That's what happened. So this notion about black on black crime, well, if you just want to take the whole continent as a color, yes. But well, I guess you could say that black on black crime. But what it was tribe on tribe crime, which you should have all the time. You have the Europeans fighting each other, two white people, Germany and versus well, you know, yeah, the English versus the French, okay, and all that all through time they're fighting each other, right? But the English know they're not French, and the French know they're not English, even though their skin complexion may be the same. Again, that's an American thing that they started once the slave trade, transatlantic slave trade happened to distinguish between the black and white, and they just made that distinction. Now, where did the native Africans get the people for the transatlantic slave trade? African kingdoms and powerful groups like those in what is now Benin actively raided neighboring tribes to capture people who were then sold to European merchants. These raids were a source of wealth and power for some African leaders, even though they led to the enslavement of thousands. Yeah. What did we say? So the surrounding areas. Took other tribes from surrounding areas. Makes sense. Here's an excerpt from the Hebrew Connection Atlanta. All right, there's an excerpt, a write-up from them that I googled online. During the transatlantic slave trade, millions of black people were taken from an area in Africa called Negroland. These black people that were taken and sold into slavery were called Negroes. There on your screen, I have a picture blowed up of Negroland where they would take the slaves. As you can see, it is part of West Africa. All right, let's go. Who are the Negroes? Where did they come from? After the siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD by Roman General Titus, millions of Israelites were not killed or captured but fled into Africa and migrated into Negroland. Over a period of several centuries, the Negroes that were sold during the transatlantic slave trade were not related to the original inhabitants of the land, the descendants of Noah's son Ham. All right, now, the people that fled were the descendants of Noah's son Shem. The people that were living there in Africa were the descendants of Noah's sons Ham. The Africans are the descendants of Noah's son Ham. The Israelites are the descendants of Noah's son Shem. They are that again, that's where you get Semitic, right? In the Zondervan Bible Dictionary, it says this about Ham. The youngest son of Noah, born probably after about 95 years before the flood, and one of the 8 persons to live through the flood. He became the progenitor of the dark races, not the Negroes, but the Egyptians, Ethiopians, Libyans, and Canaanites. Why did it say not the Negroes? Because the Negroes were the descendants of Shem, not Ham. In Zondervan's defining Ham, why was it critical for him to state that not the Negroes? What did Zondervan know? Zondervan knew that the Negroes were Israelite exiles or refugees who moved and settled in Negroland. These Israelite exiles were a deeply spiritual people that carried their sacred writings and practices with them, the Torah, from the ancient scriptures. Kept practicing it. And it was different from the customs and the ways of the people of the land that they traveled to. Right? If you look closely at the map, you can see that the slave coast on the top map is in the same place as the Kingdom of Judah. The slave coast, Kingdom of Judah, was an area dedicated to the trafficking of slaves to the United States of America. It is homeland to millions of descendants of the tribe of Judah as well as other tribes of Israel. Right there you see the map blew up. The slave coast is circled in red there to show you where it was. All right, now, by the way, the word limba is thought to originate from the word limbai, a term which occurs in several northeastern Bantu languages, meaning a non-African or a respected foreigner. In other words, the name limba itself telling you that they are respected foreigners or non-Africans. They're in Africa, but they are non-African. They weren't originally there. original inhabitants, they migrated to their areas. A majority of the people that came across on the transatlantic slave trade, wherever they ended up, America, Jamaica, Bahamas, wherever they ended up, are actually the children of Israel, of ancient Israel, the descendants of ancient Israel. I'm here to prove that. Now, again, I thought this was foolishness, and I set out to disprove it when I was talking to a coworker of mine, and all I did, because I am a seeker of the truth wherever it leads, is find out that there is too much information to prove, in fact, that this is true, by using history as a proof. I'm going to start off with the Balfour Agreement of 1917. The Balfour Agreement was signed in 1917, agreeing to make Israel a nation again. In 1948, the returning Jews were given Palestine for the nation of Israel. In 1958, President Nasser of Egypt said of the remaining Jews, "They left here black and came back white." It's a quote that he said. President Nasser's statement pointed to an inconvenient historical truth that often goes unacknowledged: the ethnic transformation of the Jewish population over millennia. His comment highlights that millions of modern Jews are either converts or light-skinned people of mixed heritage, who do not align with the physical description of the earliest inhabitants of Israel. These Europeans claiming to be Jews are nothing more than Hebrew-speaking Gentiles. And that is a quote. These Europeans claiming to be Jews, are nothing more than Hebrew-speaking Gentiles. All right? Did Henry Kissinger, and then, I highlight the things that I type on my computer when I ask the question. This is highlighted. This is a question. Did Henry Kissinger admit that the Igbo are the Jews of Africa? Yes, Henry Kissinger did refer to the Igbo people of Nigeria as the wandering Jews of West Africa in a 1969 memo to President Nixon during the Biafran War. So Egypt both saying that people of pigmentation, dark-skinned people, were Jews. When we look at history, again, Egyptian drawings depict themselves as melanated, and the Israelite slaves as having the same skin color. There, you see a picture of some slaves there. These are Egyptian slaves because they are making bricks, and that was not a job for the Egyptians to do. That was a job for their slaves to do. All right? And you can see what color these slaves are. Now, remember, Moses, when he seen an Egyptian, and he came up there, and he tried to settle the score, or settle the argument, but in the end, ended up killing one of them. All right? Then the next day, an Israelite seen him and said, and he got an argument with him, and he said, "Are you going to kill me like you did the Egyptian the other day?" Well, again, looking at this picture, and they got them all over the place. I just got one illustration. You can Google this, and you'll see that the Egyptians were dark-skinned people. But my point is, so were the Israelites. So were the Israelites. Very different, little difference in the color of their skin. Matter of fact, we're going to see a little bit later on in our study that Moses was able to blend in and hide. Moses was able to blend in and with these people to the point he was mistaken for an Egyptian. Right? Now, another part of history that was true, and there's no denying, is part of the technique of slave owners around the world was to rename the slaves to Europeanize their names, as well as give them the master's last name. An example of this would be to change Kunta Kinte to say something like Toby Brown. If you've seen Roots, you know the scene with Kunta Kinte, and they wanted to change his name, make him say his name. He refused to say his name. They kept beating on him until he said the name they wanted them to say. He wanted to give them a Europeanized name. In the Bible, you have the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and also the the story of Daniel there. When they were conquered, they changed their names. They changed their names into what the conquering nation wanted to call them. They wanted them to get rid of their Israeli names, their Hebrew names, their given names, and change it. This is what the conquering nations do. Now, also notice that conquering nations don't want you to speak your native tongue. They want you to speak the tongue of the conquering nation. They're not going to take the time to learn your language. They're going to make you learn their language, right? Some privileged Negroes were taught to read English, to read the Bible, and to preach to other slaves. That's where you got the what they call what you call them preachers. Oh man, I forgot what you call that term. It's a derogatory term for them preachers that preach what the white people want them to preach, right? So many passages were omitted from the Bible. That's the Bible that the slave owners gave the slaves. Yeah, they did give them Bibles, but so many passages were omitted from it that it was almost cut in half. The Bible that the slaves got was almost half as thick as the Bibles that we have. Well, I'm gonna say the Protestant Bibles that we have. Now there are different Bibles. You know, people got the Apocrypha, and some people have things that they consider to be non-canon. You know, you have the Ethiopian Bible. I believe it has 81 books in it. So I'm talking about the regular Protestant Bible with the 66 books. It was about half that size, right? No passages were allowed which did not line up with peace and obedience. Speaking their native tongue was forbidden, as well as their old customs, and over time, the language and customs were forgotten. Take people over there, change their name, keep them from speaking their tongue, keep them from practicing their customs. Over time, all this is going to be forgotten, and they're going to forget who they are. It should be noted that President Trump has removed and destroyed all exhibits in the Smithsonian that has to do with black history. In effect, removing the portion of it nicknamed the Blacksonian to hide information that was previously open to the masses. The new narrative being floated around is that white people, one of the narratives they have, they're trying to destroy black history. Well, at least President Trump is and his administration. All right. One of the narratives floating around is white people were only teaching blacks a trade by forcing them to do the labor they were doing. In other words, picking cotton was a trade. We're just trying to help you out. We were trying to help black people, all right? By forcing them to labor. They don't say nothing about a whip on your back being part of the trade. Trying to teach black people a job, a skill. Oh, come on, man. You really think that? I don't even want to talk about this. All right. So we're going to stop right here. And in our next section, we're going to continue proving that the people who came across on the transatlantic slave trade are the same descendants of ancient Israel. I'm Pat Brown, and I hope you enjoyed this lesson. Please